Great. I'm Professor Green, and this will be part two of chapter four of strategic management. Let's hop into core rigidity. And so this is talking about how a former core competency now is turned into a liability. And Circuit City comes to mind, right? The book talks about how they did so well with supply chain and the right products, and then all of a sudden, and brick and mortar stores, and then Amazon came in and boom, knocked them out of business pretty much, and they went bankrupt. And so they just did everything. Amazon does everything faster and better and more efficient. And so this is from section 4.4 of your textbook. And this is a result of an environmental change very often, right? That the situation, the external environment is changing. And Amazon, as I said, came in and they just had better technology, better insight into what the people wanted, what the consumer wanted, and was totally able to change the landscape in the industry. And so Circuit City then no longer fit the external environment. People were much happier ordering things online rather than going to brick and mortar stores. And so this turns a resource from an asset into a liability, as you know those terms from your accounting work classes. There's a loss of competitive advantage, and the firm may need to go out of business, as Circuit City did, and um, and that if they didn't want to go out of business, they could have, refined their model and upgraded it, but they decided not to move that way. And so here's some discussions about dynamic capabilities, right? How can you move with the market with these external changes? So, it's about the firm's ability to adapt their resources over time. You want to create, deploy, modify, reconfigure, upgrade, leverage, whatever it is that you need to do to move and change. We'll talk about the Vanguard group in a couple of minutes and how they, while they still have a low cost model for investing, they've added some capabilities that allowed them to change over the last few decades. And so the goal of these dynamic capabilities is to, create this long-term competitive advantage, to keep moving forward, to develop your resources, capabilities, and your competencies, right? Just like LMU, we are always trying to do something new. That while we are a Jesuit institution for a long time, we're also moving into the sustainability sector. So, and ethics is the umbrella for that, right? So, ethics we had before, a moral compass, but now we're also moving that into caring about the environment and how that's becoming a core competency here at LMU. The creating a strategic fit with the firm's environment, right? So again, we've talked about this a few times, how does the environment, external situation change and how can you move as an organization to meet that? And yeah, changing in a dynamic fashion. And so let's talk about more about dynamic capabilities perspectives. And so this is a model that emphasizes the firm's ability to, again, modify and leverage its resource base. So how can it change? Apple, for example, created a new market actually when they created the iPod and the Apple Store. They really changed the whole music industry. And so they continue to gain and sustain their competitive advantage. They responded to a constantly changing environment that, all around them, the music industry was changing. So they needed to move with it. And again, these markets are due to primarily technological changes, but there's also deregulation, um, like when it comes to the oil and gas industry or utilities, things like that will change. Globalization, right? There are more people, more access to markets, and demographic shifts. So, a big part in the United States is the Hispanic market is growing. Telemundo is the television channel for the Hispanic market. And it just has so much opportunity in the next couple of decades because the Hispanic population will only continue to grow. And so, yeah, resources are created, deployed, modified, reconfigured, and upgraded. Here we're talking about resource stocks and resource flows. So, developing these dynamic capabilities, stocks are the firm's current level of intangible resources. And so again, this is human resources, this is the brand, this is the reputation, these are the employees. And with this, they can come up with new product development, engineering expertise, innovation capabilities. And then the resource flows are about the level of investments to maintain or build a resource. And so that's like incoming. So, talent or technology or proprietary information, right? And so they can think about these things using this bathtub metaphor, which is pretty cool. And they use the example of IBM and artificial intelligence. And so the whole idea that there are these inflows from these different spouts, so these are the investments in the intangible resources. And so as we just spoke about, like new product development, engineering expertise, innovation, this all comes from talent, as well as from proprietary information, reputation, supplier relationships. I love that because I love business development, a little bit of sales, but business development is all about making sure that you have good relationships with your suppliers. Employee loyalty, right? No little turnover, great culture, a healthy culture, customer goodwill. So customers are excited to engage with your organization and, not try and fool your organization. Know-how and patents, as I talked about, trademarks. And then, but the outflows here are leakage and, forgetting, employee turnover. I was reading another article, watching a webinar from a friend of mine who works at George Washington University, and she talked to an author from the Financial Times who's worked in Hong Kong for a long time. So he got to know Foxconn and the Apple supply chain very well. And, they had amazing and awful turnover at Foxconn and it's like 25% on a monthly basis. But Apple was not responsible for that. Only Foxconn was. And Foxconn didn't really care that they were losing money or they weren't making a lot of profit, I should say, because they were in it for the long haul and they did the right thing because they knew that Apple would continue for a long, long time, that they had this competitive advantage and it would be really important to be the sole supplier for Apple. And they did it. And so now they have Apple between a rock and a hard place, kind of, because they are the ones that know the most about Foxconn. But for a long, long time, they had amazing, amazing, in quotation marks, they had crazy turnover, which a normal organization would never be able to handle. And so the firm value chain, this is also key learning for the chapter or for the course. And so this is all about how these internal activities they transform the inputs into the outputs. Maybe it's a simple idea, but it's, I think, important to break down what exactly is in this value chain. These are these primary and these support activities, and each activity adds a little bit of value that adds up. Like raw materials become components that become products, for example. And um, yeah, and it creates, but it also it's cost as well, right? So you have an employee that's adding a lot of value, but you have to pay for that poor employee too, right? You have to buy the silicon for the chip. So there's a cost, but that silicon is going to be very valuable in the future. And so they have this amazing chart or figure exhibit that you'll see again and again in this chapter or in this course, this value, this generic value chain, but it's a good one because it has like the key names of the departments here, right? Your art, research and development, your technology, information systems, HR, accounting, finance, the infrastructure, process, policies, procedures, often connected somewhat to human resources in my experience. And then you have the primary activities. So you see a support activities on top, and then the primary activities. Here you have supply chain, operations, distribution, marketing and sales, after sales. So for each of these, you have a piece of the above. So human resources is involved in each of these five sections. Research and development involved in a lot of these sections. IT, information systems involved in all of these sections, right? And so they're all moving forward like an elephant. And here's the where the profit margin comes in. Hopefully you're moving forward. And my experience is like, how can you make the elephant jump? right? So each of these little pieces need to coordinate and work together in order for you to jump and move forward. So each adds value, but each adds costs as well. So let's talk about the primary activities. So the supply chain, operations, distribution, etc. So these are the activities that add value directly. This transforms the inputs into outputs. You have research and design, then you have something that has a patent, perhaps. You're focusing on moving from raw materials through the production phase to sales and marketing, and finally, hopefully, customer service, right? Somebody buys the product and they have questions about it. So these are the five pieces from that value chain. And then you have the support activities, my personal favorite, 'cause that's usually where I worked. Um, and they add value indirectly. So, as I said, research and development, this is often where I worked, information systems. I worked at Citibank in IT. So I was supporting the systems that made the software for the traders on the trading desk to make the trade. So the software that I oversaw, the development was the tool that the traders used to connect with the stock exchange, whether that be New York or Tokyo, Mexico, etc. So again, I was indirectly adding value to the firm because I wasn't selling anything, but I was creating a lot of value because without this software, no trader could ever make a trade. Then you have human resources, obviously back office. Sometimes they call it accounting and finance. And so strategic activity systems, right? So this is a network of interconnected activities. This is from Learning Objective Now, number 9 on page 48. This can be the foundation of competitive advantage. So the whole idea of how these different activities work together. How does IT work with human resources, work with accounting? Right? Can be socially complex and ambiguous at times. Definitely. I worked with, here at LMU, for example, I work with HR, I work with IT, I work with PR, public relations, right? And so this very unique kind of way of all the departments working together. Um, And so this idea that, all these elements can be easily observed. We're going to see Exhibit 4.9 in a minute, example of a vanguard and how all these groups work together. And how these activities are managed is not as easily observed, right? You can't really see exactly where I engage, every day with HR or IT or the students, etc. So that kind of special combination in theory, should be difficult to imitate because that evolves into your competitive advantage, right? So the whole idea, though, is that the external environment changes and that competitors develop their activity systems, right? And so you want to make sure that they don't copy yours. And how activities are assessed and updated, they're new activities, right? And now we have different study abroad programs here at LMU. We have a new president that will have his own values within the organization. We remove activities that are no longer relevant. Like, I feel like some of the study abroad programs that we've had in the past are going away. We upgrade activities that become stale or somewhat obsolete. Um, yeah, like the course of international business in the MBA program has gone away because they feel that that can now be integrated into the marketing course or the strategy course, etc. And so the entire strategic activity system will change. And same thing for my LMU class. I continuously update my class. So here's the activity system of Vanguard's group, right? They have these 6 blue areas. So the broad array of mutual funds, excluding some categories, they had very low expenses, efficient investment management approach, strict cost control. This is in 1997, direct distribution, and straightforward client communication and education. And then as you saw here, they had these pieces like long-term investment, shareholder education out of each of these pieces. And for the most part, into 2022, everything has stayed the same except for this. They've decided to move forward with what's called customer segmentation. So they saw that other firms were really identifying who the client was and creating products specifically for that client. And so they decided to do that too. So when you have set clients, customer segmentation, it means that you're putting your customers into different like buckets, and then you're creating products specifically for those individual buckets. And they think that has really allowed them to move forward. And it has, because Vanguard is the biggest investment firm behind BlackRock. They also have an amazing economies of scale because they're so big. And they've used their competitive advantage, like having no local retail offices, because that would be a lot of cost for brick and mortar. So hopefully all that makes sense. This does bring us to the end of chapter 4. And hopefully that was interesting to learn a lot about, internal from differences, and how that is the root of competitive advantage, differentiating among the core competencies, as well as resources, capabilities, activities, what the company does. Also looking and comparing, contrasting tangible things that you can touch and feel, like buildings, with intangible, company culture, brand, the more important things. Uh, More valuable things in the big picture. We evaluated two critical assumptions about the nature of resources, right? What we have to assume when we look at these situations. We looked at the VRIO framework and the whole idea around imitation and not being able to imitate a product. Different conditions allow to sustain a sustainable environment, competitive advantage, so that you move with the times. Again, Circuit City jumps to mind that they did not move forward with the technology and the fact that people are not going to stores anymore. Outlining how dynamic capabilities let a firm sustain a competitive advantage and how they really can tune in. Apple has done that, right? And how they've even like changed the industry with the iPod. A value chain. So which of the firm's activities transforming inputs into outputs, and how that differentiation and drives costs. So talking about HR and back office, and then also talking about supply chain and marketing functions. Identifying competitive advantage in a network of all these different activities, right? So what exactly do you well, right? So you have HR, you have accounting, but what do you do well? So thinking about that Vanguard map. And then we didn't go over too much, but conducting a SWOT. So looking at your strengths and your weaknesses to generate some insights from the external and internal analysis. So thank you so much for joining me for chapter 4. I will see you again in chapter 5.